Hey,
Good morning, everyone. Talk about the best way to start the day. We have Mr. Soul here from Grimm Brothers Seeds, and I am so excited to get to talk to the one, the only Mr. Soul. Oh my goodness. How are you doing? How is your morning? And I would like to note that I am here on the East Coast and you're over on the West Coast, so it is early for you. Thank you for being here.
thank you, Ellen. I'm real happy to be with you. You know, I love you and I see you all the time at the shows, and we're good friends, but we don't talk enough, and see each other much because we're both super busy people. But when you invited me to come on here, it was like very exciting, and I jumped at the chance to come in and sit with you. And so here we are. You mentioned Brothers Grimm Seeds, and you were complimenting me on the website earlier. It's brothersgrimmseeds.com, and it's all revised and new, and you can pay for seeds with your credit card and have them shipped directly to you. And so that's a really nice recent advancement. You were asking me about Cinderella 99 and how it got the name. And if I can cue the public in, Ellen was talking to me off air a moment ago, and she was saying, like, I was born only 6 years before Cinderella 99 was created, and I was just looking it up, and I realized, oh, he called it Cinderella 99 because he released it in 1999. And I said, that's absolutely right. It's actually only one layer, though, of what is a little bit more complicated and nuanced story behind how Cinderella 99 got the name. And if you ignore the number, let's stay on the number, actually. Let's do, the 99 does represent that it was released in 1999. But remember, Cinderella 99 was a strain that was created by back crossing several times to the same female, thereby reinforcing her genes each time and creating a seed line that would then replicate that female's traits reliably all the time. And so each time we back cross, it becomes a greater percentage of the original female's genes. So think of it like, you can never make it 100%, but you can get it close, like 99%, right? So the 99 also represented that this seed line carried 99% of that original female's genes. And so that the seeds would all breed, or not breed, but produce females that look just like the mother. And so there's the two reasons the 99 was used, right? And then Cinderella just makes a great name for marijuana, because what are cinders? Ashes, right? And what does marijuana turn into when you smoke it? It turns into cinders or ashes. And it's, what are we smoking? The female cannabis plant, right? And Ella is a feminine suffix for a name, right? So Cinderella is female, marijuana that turns to ashes when you smoke it. And also, since the original female that I found that I needed to replicate to create the seed strain was from humble beginnings, just like Cinderella, cleaning the lady's house and the stepsisters and all that. And she rose above that to become the princess, right? So all those things came together in my choice of making the name Cinderella 99. So there's the whole story. I think it's the first time I've ever explained that to anybody on air.
Thank you. I learned so much, and especially coming from a cultivator's perspective, getting to talk to the breeder, especially since, like I had said to you a little bit earlier, and just to recap that, you've been doing this since I was 6 years old. So the work that you put into this industry has literally paved the way for the next generations like myself. And, you are an OG grower, pun intended, or breeder, pun intended. And you've been creating legendary strains for over 20 years.
Yep.
And I was wondering, because, when we think about our industry in over 20 years, 1999 was a different world. Medical had just become legislatively active in California a couple of years prior. Things were just starting to come online. There was still more gray area than anything else. What inspired you to start being a breeder at what I would think would be such a high risk point at the industry? There was no way you could have, possibly known what it would have turned into. Was it passion? What was it?
Stop right there. I love it. Great question. My mother told me growing up, as she noticed that I really enjoyed marijuana from the age of about 14 on, she said, that it'll never be legal, you're wasting your time, and now I can kind of like, she looks at me now, and she was once in the hospital like during the last year, and with the orderlies who were pushing her around or whatever, she dropped the name Cinderella 99 and Mr. Soul, and that, that's her son. And these guys were actually like treating her special and everything, So now she's actually had to swallow her pride, or eat crow, or however you want to put it, and realize that she was so wrong that, I always told her my reasoning was this. I said, it will too be legal one day, because logic has to prevail one day. You cannot oppress this substance and at the same time glorify alcohol and allow for cigarette smoking and so on. It's like, when there are these rides at the fair where you have to be at least this tall to get on the ride, right? Well, think of that in reverse. It's like, you have to be at least this bad, to be a drug. And these guys are way the fuck over it, right? Excuse me. And they're way the fuck over it, and they're legal, right? But somehow this little runt who can fit under the barrier, oh no, you have to stay back. That cannot persist. A system, a setup like that, it's just doomed, because eventually it's the emperor wears no clothes thing, right? Jack Herer, right? He's saying that, eventually, maybe from the mouths of babes, all the people who are, deluding themselves and listening to the stigma around marijuana and, the purposeful way that it was maligned and made to be associated with shady characters and, be careful, don't let your girlfriend smoke marijuana, she'll be running off
Reefer Madness,
jazz musician or something. I use the euphemism jazz musician in that case. It's because they were so racist about it. It was so blatant. It was like, your wife will fool around with a black dude or whatever. She let her, so much bad, right? But none of that could be substantiated by any fact or any evidence, And so when you have claims being made that are so great without any evidence at all, either they say a great claim has to be backed by great evidence, to support such a great claim. And so eventually it just dissolved. There was just no way of preventing younger people from generations after the 60s and 70s and so on from realizing, like, these are technically bright kids. They're growing up with smartphones in their hands and everything like that. They're going to be able to see right away that this is just a hypocrisy. Mm-hmm. So in the end, why was I bold enough in the face of all of that to go ahead and become a marijuana grower? I guess that feeling of cultivating something is very cathartic, just for the human condition alone. We were talking earlier off air, and Ellen was asking me some question that led to me saying, going to work as an engineer, because that's what I got my degrees out of college, were masters in nuclear engineering. Also, my bachelor's was in nuclear engineering. But when I was going into graduate school, right around that time, I got interested in having my own little garden, because my roommates and I found an apartment that had a walk-in closet, so it was just one of those coincidences of availability. What was it? Just, it was there. Like, why are you a mountain climber? It's there, And there was this walk-in closet, and I could picture myself putting up like I had been reading High Times, and I bought the book by Jorge Cervantes, Marijuana Cultivation. And I learned so much about like all the things that I didn't realize you had to do to grow marijuana, even though all my life in the back of my mind as a kid, I was like, yeah, I'd love to grow it, but why do I need to? My friends have it, or I can buy some on the street or whatever. And I didn't get bitten by the bug until much later, I guess. I was in college. So there's this walk-in closet, I've got the book, how to do it. And I'm like, I'm an engineer after all, and engineers love shit like that. Here I am going to design the, perfect environment in a little room for these plants to grow. Fucking fascinating, what a great project, Meanwhile, I'm studying and learning all mathematical and, very technical subjects, but not a lot of hands-on stuff there. And come home in the evening, I can relax and smoke a joint in my room and have a walk-in closet with my little growing environment. So that really turned me on. And then even if all of that's true, you still have to be the kind of person that I was described by once by one of my guitar teachers. He says, I have a 4-letter word that describes Rick, and I was like, oh, really? He says, yes, B-O-L-D. I'm a bold person. I'm not the kind of person who, I won't do something because there's some rule against it, especially if I feel like that rule is bullshit. And that's basically what we've been saying all this time is that, we've been up against bullshit rules, people saying something about this substance that we love and that's just complete bullshit, and eventually the light just shines on this long enough that people see it for what it is and expose it for the lie that it is. And that's all that's happened over this time. And that's why we're entering this explosion of legalization throughout the country. There's so much benefit that comes from legalizing marijuana and not holding it down and being discriminatory toward it, because basically that's what it is. It's discrimination. It's another form of discrimination. And we'll talk about seeds if we get a chance, because I have some philosophical ramblings I'd like to share about the definition of seeds, cannabis seeds. And I think it's really interesting food for thought for anybody who likes to kind of think about philosophy and life and stuff like that, and how that also plugs into what we're doing and the legalization movement, and how when you do let people have marijuana available to them medically and recreationally, how do you control the flow of all of that and make sure it's a fair system? The people working within the system should be compensated, and it shouldn't be some kind of oligarchy, where all of a sudden now everybody's just working as slaves or minions in this industry, where these white collar people came in who were not really cannabis community people, and they're the puppet masters now, making huge amounts of money off of something that they maligned for 100 years. That kind of hypocrisy. Bernie Sanders addressed that. If he were to be president, he was talking about ways where he was looking for fairness in the cannabis legalization establishment. And I've never really seen legalization in any state where they did it in a way where I go, oh yeah, that's perfect. That makes sense. They're doing it right. And I think one of the big mistakes they make and why they're not getting it right is that they don't turn to people who have been in the illegal industry for all their lives, like myself, and say, hey, we need you on a panel where you're going to advise the people who are trying to codify the laws that surround and establish the legalization of cannabis in our state. And I would go about it by saying, well, in the illegal world, here's how we did it. And you kind of want to follow that model. Instead, they don't, and that's the basic mistake I think they're making, is that, the way that it's supposed to work was already created by a much better system, that is organically, by letting the market just figure itself out. You could see what the cannabis trade and how things were done by us guys for decades and say, well, when all the chips settle, and the system is allowed to thrive on its own and be a symbiotic relationship between the buyer and the seller at each stage of the game. And also the grower has to be using a system of growing plants that makes sense to him and doesn't hog tie him. Like, I'm doing this stupid thing that the government is making me do that slows down my process, doesn't improve the product, and it's just one of these red tape bullshit things that got thrown in by somebody who was a legislator and didn't know what he was doing.
Yeah.
I'd love to see all those kinds of things corrected. And not that I have a lot of time to jump on one of these panels, but if they asked me to, I'd probably have a few things to say and try to help.
You're the person that they need to be talking to, because you are somebody, like you said, who has helped to create this industry from the ground up, like a plant. really help to grow it and maintain it and take care of it. And it's important, you know, to make sure that all the final products get good, like the green products.
The history of this cannabis community and the way that this plant substance has been used, shared, and treated as a hobby has to kind of evolve into the legal system too. You know, there could be an argument made that, gee, you know, there's no need to do anything more than just designate cannabis like a tomato. You know, like, we don't control the way people grow tomatoes in their backyard. Why the hell would we control the way they grow cannabis in their backyard? You know, you just do whatever. It's laissez-faire, you know. And then if somebody wants to make a business of it, people make a business of selling tomatoes, don't they? I mean, do they feel somehow threatened by those who grow their own tomatoes in their backyard? I don't think so. You know, they still make huge profits. I was talking to a guy yesterday. He says he can't wait to buy a bunch of greenhouses and just grow straight fruits for profit. I was like, is there really any money in that? Because business-wise, I've always been a very pessimistic kind of person, as far as like, I could never understand when I walked down the Champs-Élysées in Paris, you know, and I knew how much they're paying for rent for every one of those places. I'm like, how in the hell are they selling enough product in that place to pay even the rent, let alone make any money here, right? So that's just the way I think, right? So when I think about all my life, I'm growing and selling cannabis from the time that I got, you know, really into this. And I'll segue into how I got out of college and then got into the business a little bit more in detail in a minute. But just let me finish that thought and say that growing and producing the cannabis and the amount of money I would make to support myself and my family during the years when I was doing that seemed just about enough to barely make it worthwhile doing it. And then I'm thinking to myself, how the hell does somebody make a living selling roses or tomatoes or something? Because I'm getting $3,500 a pound at that time, you know, for cannabis. And I could make maybe 2 pounds every 2 months. You know, I'm like just squeaking by with about $3,000 of income a month. And I'm supporting 2 children and myself, and you know, I was divorced, so I'm paying child support, and I'm also supporting myself and my new wife in another location. So point being, you know, if they're saying that growing fruit in greenhouses, there's enough margin to make a really good living at that, I mean, that's impressive. So going back to, is there any competition between the little guy, mom and pop in their backyard who want to grow their own and supply themselves so that, you know, they can sit like a couple of hippies in their basement and smoke pot and listen to, you know, I don't know, Deep Purple, you know, whatever they're into, Moby Grape.
Absolutely.
That's their prerogative, right? So the legal framework within which legal cannabis growing and selling and distribution and so on, I think that we really ought to get into a powwow with the old OGs, as you were calling, and get the modern panel of you know, legal people to all talk and figure it out, because there's a lot of wisdom still in that experience that came from just years of organically allowing the dust to settle and everybody to feel satisfied, like the buyer on his end felt like he's getting a good deal and the seller is getting a good deal. And I listen to a lot of philosophy podcasts. Stephen West is one of my favorite ones. It's called Philosophize This. You all should listen to these. Go back and listen from the very first episode all the way through. Put it on your headphones and just be working all day and listening to philosophy. It'll enrich your life immeasurably. So he talks about how central planning is a way of government where it's socialism or communism essentially, and you try to, or at least the idea behind that philosophy is that you imagine a financial system, an economy, right? And that it should work in such a way, you know, that everything's fair and equal and balanced, right? And so then you exert pressure from the government to force the economy to act that way, right? And he says that it's always going to be so inferior to allowing the system to settle itself, because you can't imagine all of the layers of complexity and nuance that go into how the buyer and seller agree to do business, and the local knowledge that goes into any one business is so complicated or complex that a central planning board, is just like a sledgehammer trying to do the job of a pair of tweezers. It's just too blunt a tool. And so similarly, I think that, this is the problem that we're looking at, is that they're trying to centrally plan legalization of marijuana, and that's not the way to do it. You have to look into, like, how did this business work before we tried to make it legal? And then copy a lot of the stuff, even though it sounds like, well, are you saying copy the illegal way of doing it? Well, yeah, it's just that we're not going to call it illegal anymore. Now it's legal to do what we used to do illegally. How simple is that?
That's amazing. And you are right. You are the person who has been there from the ground, seeing the advancements. And speaking of advancements, you've been breeding for over 20 years. In the last 2 decades, have you seen any advancements specifically as it relates to breeding?
Yeah, yes. If you think about breeding and the availability of cannabis seeds to the public, when I was in college and I found that, I had that walk-in closet grow, there were only two cannabis seed companies in the world, on the planet. Think about that, because today you just probably take it for granted if you're a young person, 30 or whatever like you, where, there's innumerable seed companies that you could choose from to buy a pack of seeds. It's almost impossible to count the number. I don't even know how many are out there right now. But there were only 2. It was the seed bank, Neville Schoenmacher, and then the other one was Super Sativa Seed Club with Keish and the gang over there. Well, when I got out of college, the strangest thing happened. Am I going off topic?
Yeah, no, anything. I'm just writing down the name of the seed bank.
Yeah. So anyway, at that time, there were only 2 seed banks. And so now there's so many, because over time, people realized, like, okay, the seed market is actually a pretty cool niche. You can make a lot of seeds. They sell for a relatively high price. But the downside is that you can't sell all the seeds you created in one crop, like, immediately and make a ton of money like you can with actual flower. So you're sitting on the seeds and they're selling slowly, but, it's a good income. So that model obviously attracts people who want to be in business. And the more the rush towards something like that seems like a gold rush, the more unscrupulous people try to jump into the game as well. And then you get people who maybe even well-meaning people, but they just don't understand the complexities of breeding and creating seeds. So they think they're doing something okay, but they're actually screwing it up. And then they're perpetuating problems in the market amongst the people who are buying their products. And to get more specific about that, okay, imagine that, breeding, not imagine, but recognize that breeding is a process that's very scientific. There's a lot of nuance to it. There's some very basic things that you can grab a hold of and say, well, this is always true. I mean, Mendel said, like begets like. You breed with two individuals who have characteristics or share a characteristic that you'd like to see in the progeny. You're more likely to have it in the progeny if the parents had it. So like begets like. That's a fairly commonly known concept, or the average person on the street probably gets that, or 8th grade biology that passed through their brain at one point, and whether it was retained or not, they've probably heard that and it'll sound familiar. And so they take that and then generalize and just oversimplify that concept and think, well, I've got this cool sounding strain called, and I'm going to make these names up, Durban licorice pop, and I'm going to cross it with golden wedding cake, because I love the way that those 2 names sound together, and I'm going to call this golden hot fudge or something when it's done. Not realizing that, when they're breeding these 2 things together, they're thinking, okay, these are 2 hot strains, and so it should produce some hot progeny. But those were created from combining a lot of genes from different kinds of plants. And the way that gene reassortment in breeding works is that, obviously everybody knows, that's another general rule that everybody knows, is you get half your genes from your mom and half from your father, right? And so they figure, okay, well, this one's going to contribute from this side and the other one's going to contribute from that side. But there are many unused genes that are in the plant that are there that can randomly resort each time there's a progeny being created. So
dominant traits.
Right, and here's where things start to really go awry, is that if you have a pure breeding landrace strain on the mother's side and the father's side, what's essentially happened is that evolution over a long time has stabilized the genes in both of these parents to the point where there's not a lot of variation in the way they can come out. Imagine if they were like balls in a hopper, where you're, like the lottery, like where you roll the balls in the little cage, but all the balls are black on the father's side and all the balls are white on the mother's side. Now, when they come together, there's no other combination but black and white balls. And so the babies come out looking alike, every one, right? Because there's no variation in the genes. But when you have these polyhybrids, imagine now you've got a basket with black balls, white balls, orange balls, pink balls, green balls, every color of the rainbow. And every time they recombine, you're getting a string of genes that doesn't look at all like the last one. It's like lottery numbers, And so you buy a pack of seeds that theoretically should be this blending of those two strains, but you're really getting everything up and down and across the spectrum. And so then an interesting phenomenon starts to happen among the buyers. It's almost like they're dumb enough to think that, like, well, the breeders must be brilliant and we're doing something wrong here. So now they develop this thing where it's like, yeah, man, I'm down in the trenches working at, pheno hunting. I'm pheno hunting. I'm a pheno hunter. What the hell are you freaking talking about? The guy is selling you a pack of seeds that has no resemblance whatsoever. The plants coming out of that pack of seeds resemble in no way the description on the back of the pack or the picture on the website that's supposed to be what it looks like when it grows. And you're thinking you're doing something wrong and you just have to buy more packs of seeds and search for the good one? In what world does someone who's in a business produce a product like that where the customer tries to correct for the mistakes of the manufacturer? That's ridiculous, right? So when you buy a pack of seeds, you should expect that in that pack, you're going to get seeds that produce plants that look like the picture on the pack and grow according to the description, how it's described either on the website or the pack of seeds or whatever, right? Is that so crazy to think that that should be the expectation of the buyer when they're buying seeds? I don't think so, right? So yes, in the time that we went from 2 seed banks who were run by people who were real breeders and knew what they were doing and were working with quality parent plants and so on, it became a gold rush of, just kids in their basement making seeds and selling them and people creating businesses out of nothing, basically. So it becomes really hard to pick and choose. Plus, there's this factor of, the cool sounding name and the fad strain of the month or whatever. And so people will go through, there was the Blue Dream phase, and the Gorilla Glue phase and everything. Now there's the Mac out, Mac it's the year of the Mac, Hats off to Capulator. I love that guy. He is a great human being and he's doing a lot of wonderful things for the cannabis community in the deep recesses of like the really grungy level of hardcore underground grower community. He's really got that locked down right now, and hats off to him. He's a great guy. But there are those who don't know what they're doing so well, and so it kind of polluted the market or diluted the market. And then there's the whole feminized seed thing, which I know you're going to want to talk about.
Yeah, that's perfect. You're segueing right into my next question, which is when it comes to...
I didn't do that on purpose.
I know, it's very organic.
I told you, that's always the best way.
Oh, I love talking to you. It's so great getting to, hear these stories and your perspective. Like you say, I get to see you at conventions, but actually getting to have your time and do an interview is really, educational. Seriously, thank you.
Wow.
And with what you do, you've worked so hard for, whether you call them feminized or all female seeds.
I didn't do feminized seeds for most of my career. I mean, I was very much against the idea of doing that. I was being lazy, in a certain way, because I'm a scientist and I should have just, dug a little deeper and figured out. But we didn't even have the internet, back in the late 90s. It was barely the internet. I mean, we had chat rooms and when you Google something right now, you have no idea how cool that is compared to what we had to do in the 90s. I mean, you got a list of possible websites when you do a search for something that 90% of it was just garbage. It had nothing to do with what you were looking for. And now Google, I mean, you Google anything, if you can remember 3 words to a song that you heard on the radio earlier that day, you can just put them into Google and it'll actually find the song that you were listening to. It's so powerful now, right? So where was I? Why am I complaining about the internet?
Well, with the feminized or the female seeds getting a bad rap in the early 90s, what have you done to perfect that?
Well, here's what I've done is that I looked at it at that time as, there's something wrong here. They're making too many hermaphrodites when they do this. I was super proud of having created Cinderella 99 for all of the characteristics and traits that it already is famous for, but underlying all of that, one of the most important traits of it for me was that it never creates any hermaphrodites, right? So a non-Hermy strain has always been something that has been associated with Brothers Grimm. We don't sell anything that Hermes, right? So I only have I think it's 10 strains if you don't count like the femme version and regular version of each strain. There may even be as few as 8. So let's say I have 8 or 9 strains on my whole menu and I've been breeding for 20 years. What does that tell you? I'm being extremely selective about what I will release. And if I think that this is a strain that belongs on the menu, that has to mean that there's nothing else on the menu that's anything like it, or you don't want to have like Led Zeppelin 1 and 2. I mean, you need to have 2 very different. Why is it even on the menu if it's the same thing as something else? It has to distinguish itself as being unique enough and stand on its own and be different enough from everything else on the menu to support its being there, right? And so I work that way. And so it would be very important for me that if I were to release fem seeds, what a huge embarrassment for me and as a breeder and my company's reputation if they weren't perfect, right? So I didn't want to risk messing up my great reputation, and I was kind of being lazy, and I was sort of limited my tools. That's why I was complaining that, at that time, I couldn't just Google any scientific research papers that have been written on genetics and, ferret my way through all of this rabbit hole of information that I eventually did do to discover that the assumptions I had made about how fem seeds were being created or could be created was wrong. So I had some wrong assumptions in my mind, which I can discuss now in specifics, but just to cover the overarching theory of, why did you even create feminized seeds and what did you do between then and now that changed your mind? Well, I've essentially established that my biggest concern was I didn't want to create hermaphrodites. And so when I found there was a way to do it without creating hermaphrodites, that's what made my mind up to go ahead and do this and say, okay, I can make fem seeds and do it right and not have the problems of the people who were doing it before who didn't understand what they were doing and they were making a crucial mistake, which I'm about to explain. And so that made me decide, yeah, okay, I'll do this now that I know I can do it right. And the way that I figured out that I could do it right was by having the power of the internet. And in 2016 or 17, I started to really burrow down into this. And here was where the big mistake in my mind, the misconception that had led me astray for so long was, what is a hermaphrodite? Is it let's back up. What's a boy and a girl? I mean, people sometimes even very recently ask me, why is it Saint XX after the one of the packs of Cinderella and the other one Cinderella 99? And I'm like, I guess I was just assuming people were a lot more conscious of things that I take for granted. And I got a little too cute for myself in naming them XX because I thought it was obvious. Those are the fem seeds, right? I mean, XX is female, XY is male, right? It is basic biology, but people don't walk down the street thinking, like a biologist or a scientist like I do. They're just average people. And so they think it means, I've had people come up and think it's a Roman numeral and say, why is this one Cinderella 20? And, oh shit. It's I get too cute for myself sometimes. So
I like it. It's clever. If you know, you know. And then you'll know later.
Oh, I love that because I got into with my new girlfriend. She likes rap music and stuff, and so I got turned on to this old school Biggie Smalls and stuff. And he does this song, if you don't know, now you know. But I changed it because now when I put out information for growers, like I go at the end of it all, I can use this little catch line like, if you don't know, now you know, grower. Right?
Hey,
you just substitute the word
that's
grower.
Gonna catch on. That's a bumper sticker.
So where was I? Okay, the XX and XY thing leads me to then say, well, what's a hermaphrodite? And all this time I was thinking it was a chromosomal definition. In other words, boys are XY, girls are XX, and a hermaphrodite must be something else. However, once I started to dig into like scientific research and genetics and genetic scientists who have written papers for journals, and you start pouring through that shit and you start saying hermaphroditism cause, and you do the research, you start to realize like, oh, hermaphrodites aren't a different chromosomal arrangement. Do you know what causes hermaphroditism? Hormones. And when you think about it, it's so obvious once you realize it. It's like, oh yeah, for a couple of very important reasons, and I'll attack both directions. But first is, if you can imagine the reassortment of genes every time a baby is being created from a mother and a father, right? The X and the Y chromosomes. The mother is contributing always an X, and the father can contribute either an X or a Y, right? And so from that kind of an operation, right, would you expect that there would be a great number or a great frequency of miscodings where there's something weird going on, that there's not just an X and a Y, but there's two Ys? Like, okay, hermaphrodites are when somehow two Y chromosomes come together, right? This would be extremely rare. Would that not be reasonable to expect that those kinds of things would happen very, very rarely? And then now stop yourself and say, okay, so if it works by a chromosomal misalignment, then hermaphroditism should be very rare. Is it? Hell no. People are complaining about hermaphrodites all the time. It's not rare. Okay, so that should tell you right there, it's not the chromosomes that's doing this. And then when you think about human beings, our friends in the trans community, right? What do they do when they want to align closer to the gender that they feel they were born to be? What's the solution? Starts with an H, hormones. They take hormones, and it shifts the female to being more male. She takes testosterone, right? Males become more female if they take her, what's the other one? Come on, Ellen. What's the?
Like estrogen. There's estrogen for females.
Estrogen. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So testosterone.
No, I'm just thinking. I'm honestly like I'm just.
And there's
taken aback because I've never thought of
progesterone
that.
too. Yeah. So,
testosterone.
but there are male and female hormones. We all recognize that, and they all have the effect of shifting the gender of the person who's taking those hormones in the direction of either male or female, right? So what's really happening when a plant, a female cannabis plant, because basically that's what we're trying to grow. The problem is when we think we have a female and somehow it starts growing male flowers, right? That's the true definition of a hermaphrodite in our business, is a supposedly female plant that grows male flowers as well, that's our hermaphrodite, and it's what we want to avoid because they're worse than having a male in the room, because you think it's a female and then it's like a Trojan horse that releases its soldiers
it is a Trojan horse
and ruins your crop, right?
Yeah.
So hermaphrodites are the worst. They're the scourge of our business. So we want to avoid that. Well, when the guys were making fem seeds originally, here's what they were doing. Imagine, we'll just do a thought experiment. You got this room full of 100 supposedly female plants, right? And you put them into flowering, but then you start playing with the light cycles, and go like long day, short day, long day, short days, and interrupting, stressing them. And light cycle stress is the one stress that's most likely to induce hermaphroditism, because it's the light cycle that induces flowering, period, right? So it's the light cycle that's responsible for the plant to start expressing its sex. So if you fuck with that, it's more likely to show the ones who react to that kind of stress by growing male flowers. Those are the hermaphrodites, right? Now imagine you had a room full of 100 supposedly female plants. These guys are picking out the ones that are herming and taking their pollen and then trying to use that to make female seeds. Why? Because they figured, and rightly so, a female, right, if you can force it to make pollen, that pollen can't have any Y chromosomes in it. Why? Because a female only has 2 X chromosomes, so it can't magically produce a Y out of nowhere, right? So when the pollen from a female plant lands on another female plant, it's all X's, baby. There's no Y. So you're only going to get female seeds. The thing that they didn't realize, though, is that pollen is coming from a plant that proved itself to be a hermaphrodite, and like begets like. Remember our earlier conversation about Mendele's law, right? So it all ties together. So when you're taking a hermaphrodite and breeding with it, you're going to get more hermaphrodites. Yes, many of those plants may be just pure female and not have hermy traits, but many of them will. And that's what gave feminized seeds a bad name, right? So people say, well, what the fuck good is buying a pack of seeds that's supposed to be all females if there's even 1% chance that some of them are going to be hermes, right? So there's a huge population of people who don't understand even to this day what that problem and how it was created gave this feminized seed a bad name, and that the solution to it is the following. All right, we'll go back to that room with the 100 plants, right? So we have this room where out of 100 supposedly female plants, the light cycle stresses have identified, let's say 50 of them, just to use an even number, right? Like half of them hermied, right?
Yep.
Well, in the past, those guys focused on them and used them, right? And what they should have been doing is throwing them out of the room and focusing on the plants that didn't hermy and try to breed with them. But then you run into the problem of, well, wait a minute. If I can't make this female make male flowers and make pollen, how the hell am I going to, get X pollen to pollinate another plant and make fem seeds? Well, here's where then more research had to be done for me to understand the mechanism by which the hormones created a hermaphrodite in the first place. And here's what it is. It's like, imagine a light switch, right? And so when the stresses are applied to the plant, it's like pushing that light switch on, right? And if that plant has a hermaphroditism trait, that switch will then activate the hormones or deactivate the hormones, whichever way you like. If it's deactivating the female hormone in the female, what happens? Her flowers start growing male, right? And that's the mechanism by which hermaphroditism works. It's the stress flips a switch. This is a mental mechanism, a way to understand it, right? So it's like the stress is flipping a switch on the plant, and the 50 in the room that were hermes showed that, okay, that switch actually activates this hormone or deactivates a hormone in me and makes me now make male flowers on a female plant. So we pull them out of the room. Now, the other ones, no matter how much stress we applied to them, they didn't Hermy. So we like that. That means these don't have the Hermy trait. And if we could somehow, by some magic, make them make male flowers and make pollen, they would actually make female plants that don't Hermy. And it would just be all females, no males, no Hermies. That's our goal. That's what we really want, right? Mm-hmm. So recognizing that it's really the hormone or lack of the hormone that's triggering the plant to make the male flowers, you can take the 50 plants in the room that didn't Hermy and use hormones on them to induce them to create male flowers on a female plant, and the pollen from those male flowers will be purely X pollen, and it won't carry the gene for hermaphroditism. And then as long as, now here's the last link in the chain, the receiving end, the female who's going to make the seeds that receives the pollen, also has to have been tested to be one of those plants that didn't Hermy, right? Or else it would have a Hermy trait too. So as long as those two parents are two females that are non-Hermy females, and the one is induced to create male flowers hormonally, and the way we do that now is that you use silver thiosulfate. Just pretty easy to buy the chemicals and mix it yourself, and it's a diluted solution that you spray on the plant during the first 2 weeks of flowering. You spray the female that you want to induce to flower male flowers and make the pollen. I call it the pollen donor, right? And then what's happening is that the spray is blocking, you mentioned estrogen for women, it's ethylene in plants. And so by the silver molecule in the silver thiosulfate, you can think of it as almost being like one of those receptors in your body that looks like a key slot, and the other thing is the key, and it fits in it perfectly. Well, the silver molecule somehow does that with the plant and blocks ethylene from being produced in the plant. So ethylene's the female hormone for a plant. It's analogous to estrogen in women. So when silver thiosulfate is sprayed on the plant during flowering, it blocks the female hormone, and then on a female plant, it starts growing male flowers. So what you've done is you've taken a plant that doesn't Hermy naturally through stress-induced hermaphroditism, and you've hormonally induced it to produce male flowers that then will produce pollen that has nothing but X chromosomes in it, because that's how a seed becomes a male or a female seed in the first place. Some people think that you can do something to a seed after it's already sitting in front of you to induce it to be either a male or a female. That's bullshit, because what's happening is that the female flower is sitting there and a pollen grain lands on it, and that pollen grain, if it's from a male plant, it will have a 50% chance of being X and a 50% chance of being Y, just like the sperm from your father, right? So we know at the moment of inception that whether if it was an X chromosome pollen or a Y chromosome pollen, it's either going to be a male plant or a female plant that grows from that seed, right? So what we do is in a room full of females, you release the pollen from another female, hormonally induced as we just described, right? And what happens? Now you've got a cloud of pollen in there, and every one of those grains of pollen has an X chromosome in it, and therefore every seed that's created is going to be a female seed. And you notice I don't like to use the word feminized, right?
Yep.
Lorna mentioned that earlier. Here's why. I'm a stickler for language. I really enjoy language and the secrets that it reveals just by the structure of the way that people construct their sentences, and their language is designed by the country that they're from and so on. It tells you a lot about the way people look at things. And so to me, feminized, first of all, it's a past tense word, right? So that means that something was done previously to this seed. And it gives you the feeling that, feminized seeds. I've actually had people write me an email and tell me, like, I just got the seeds and I just want to make sure I know how to feminize them before I plant them.
Oh, wow.
What in the name of God are you talking about? And it's all because they're called feminized, right? So when you use the word in English feminized, it sounds like, okay, somebody brought me a bowl of seeds that were just regular seeds. I either grabbed a magic wand and waved it over them, or some kind of hocus pocus, or put them in a microwave oven, or who the fuck knows, right? And converted them from being regular seeds into feminized seeds, right? It totally doesn't work that way, right? We're just creating female seeds by making sure that all the pollen that lands on the mother plant have X chromosomes in them, not Y's. And that's all there is to it. So I like to call them female seeds, or femme with 2 M's and an E, because I'm fussy like that. F-E-M-M-E.
I see what you did.
Femme fatale. So you got a lot of information about, the femme seed controversy, how I corrected it in my own practices. And, I sell a lot of femme seeds now because people do seek me out as kind of the country's expert on femme seeds. And I wish I could, not feel so self-serving every time I talk about femme seeds, because I don't know any other breeder who has done the research or is doing the practice the way that I do. And I can't therefore be able to say, well, I endorse so-and-so and you can get seeds from him. It sounds self-serving. People will come to me and say, well, where can I get femme seeds reliably, that I can count on to be all female? I'm sorry, but I'm the only game in town. Doesn't that sound terrible? I'm sorry.
No, and not at all. You've done the work, you've done the research, and you're a reputable source. There's nobody I'd rather ask besides you specifically about this topic.
I appreciate that.
And with that in mind, you've educated thousands of people around the world about, female seeds. And where can we find your next education series? Like, can we find any of your videos online, or do you have anything coming up?
Here's the thing. I had a really busy beginning of this year, and right up and through spring. Like I said, doing the tour with CannaCon and doing the seminars and explaining in great detail, the whole femme seed seminar has boosted the business a lot, and I got busy. But I'm taking on staff and learning how to delegate, because I've always been like, a guy who does everything myself. And, the philosophy of, if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. I'm loosening up. I let my sister, she was the one who created the website and completely revamped it and found the right ways to present everything. And it's gorgeous. I really hope everybody will go and check it out. But you're asking about what to expect for the future. We have a blog section in this new website, which is brothersgrimmseeds.com, obviously. And in the blog section, I've already started with 1 or 2 articles, but as I push myself, and I really need somebody to kind of pester me a little bit more to constantly create content, because there's a lot of stuff that's just sitting there floating around in my mind every day that I could write down or have written down that we could put in there. But right now, the latest thing that we put in, I think, is super important and super helpful to anybody growing, and it's a plant deficiency diagnostic tool. And a picture like a flow chart where you start at the top and you say, okay, my plant has a problem. Okay, tell me about your problem. Is the top of the plant, is the new growth yellowing, or is it affecting only the older growth of the plant, and if so, go to 3, if not, go to 2, and it kind of weaves you through diagnosing anything that you see on your plants. And I think everybody should download that and, have it printed out and tack it up to the wall in your garden. And anytime you see something that's like, that doesn't look right, what the hell is that? Well, let me go through the checklist, this flow chart, and it'll lead you right to. I had a pretty complicated iron deficiency, or it seemed like complicated because I was like, what the hell is that? What's causing that? And what that I'm talking about was there were like green veins in the leaves, but like an iridescent yellowish lime green everywhere else. And I was like, that's a strange thing. And it was only happening when I was transplanting the clones coming out of an arrow cloner into soil, and they were in their first pot for maybe 2 weeks to a month. And then by the time they got transplanted to the next larger container, it kind of went away on its own. But I was curious, what the hell is that? I mean, I don't like seeing something that doesn't look right, even if it goes away later. And it was an iron deficiency, but it was complicated because iron deficiencies can be caused by other things like pH being out of the right range, and also by having an overabundance of phosphorus, which turned out to be the problem in my case, because I was using a pH down that was super high phosphorus pH down, it was phosphoric acid. And so in the veg state, the plants didn't like so much phosphorus and were complaining about it in that way. And then when they would go into the flowering room, of course, they love phosphorus and it wasn't a problem anymore, right? So that flow chart helped me figure that out, and I stopped using that pH down, went to something else, and the problem went away. So people should check out that stuff because it's real practical. And I'm hoping, since I enjoy, you know, obviously from how much I talk here, I like listening to myself talk apparently, right? So
I like listening.
I hope to do more videos and, you know, have, in the interest of those kinds of things, I'd like to take on an assistant, you know, like who could be, the right person would have to be, it'd be very hard to find exactly the right person, but, you know, they have to have all this list of skills and plus be able to be around, live with me in my house. So it's a big job. But if I had that type of person, hopefully I'll do this more in the future, but I want to do more videos. I want to do Mr. Soul stops and, you know, in the middle of something that he's doing to share with the crowd, you know, like that kind of thing where I can
That's invaluable. It's really
yeah, you know, it's fun for me to do. It's fun for me to do, and there are so many times where I've tried to train somebody to do gardening and realize how hard it is to teach it, you know, and there's so much feel to it. It's like playing the blues, you know what I mean? You can't play it straight and right on time. There's places where you just have to, you know, play behind and ahead of the beat. And how do you teach somebody that? You know, I described it to an assistant I had down in Colombia a couple of months ago in the following way. It's kind of funny to say this, right? But I said, just so you understand that this isn't something that you can kind of like make a list of every day I'm going to do this amount of water to this group of plants at this time of day. There's a feel to this. You have to be able to look at the plants and read them and see if on that day, is it really necessary to do what you had planned to do or not, and maybe do something different or not do it at all. And those decisions come from an ability to look at your plants and read them that is so hard to teach. And I said, this little statement that I'm about to make will give you a window into the way that I think that will reveal to you how difficult it is to teach you what I'm trying to teach you, because this is a feeling that I have on at least a weekly basis, maybe a couple times a week. I have the feeling of I'm alone in my garden, I'm doing something to a plant that if somebody else who was an expert at this was watching me do it, they'd say, are you fucking crazy? That's not the right thing to do right now, but I know it is. See, how do I teach somebody that? You know, like when you can expect that at least once a week, you're going to be doing something that technically somebody would say that's wrong, but you know it's right. It's so hard to teach that, you know? And so if I were to give those, I'm sorry, just one more second. So if I were to give you those little vignettes into my world, I think that that would be enlightening, and it would be one way to try to teach that stuff that's so hard to teach, you know?
Absolutely, and everything you do is intuitive. After decades of doing it, I'm sure you have a skill set that you couldn't teach. It only comes from time and practice, and then being able to have an assistant that could literally shadow you and watch your mannerisms and movements, I think that would be invaluable. And to add a camera.
The list of skills would be like, you know, you have to be a good videographer, photojournalist, good with accounting software and spreadsheets and anything else, you know. Only thing I don't need this assistant to be is helping with growing, because I already have growing people and processing people, trimmers and seed counters and that kind of stuff. But somebody who could be my social media director and all that other stuff. And I guess that's the big hurdle right now, is trying to find the ideal right-hand person to hang with me and help me help the rest of the community, you know, by sharing the things that right now I just feel I'm just time restricted and constrained. I can't share as much as I'd love to. And people follow both my personal feed on Instagram, especially if you like photography and the outdoors and my ranch and alpacas and dogs and sunsets and all that kind of stuff. And then there's Brothers Grimm Seeds Instagram feed, where I try to keep that a little more focused on Brothers Grimm and what we're doing. And we're running out of time, I'm sure, here. But
we can go a little bit longer if it's okay with you.
I'll just make one comment that in the interest of, bringing people up to speed as to where Brothers Grimm Seeds is, we are growing as a company very rapidly during this last year. There's an associate of mine in Oklahoma now. In Oklahoma, you may know, being the advocate that you are, just totally blew up in the legalization phase because they didn't create such huge hurdles, and they ran the legalization, how they codified the laws and how they structured the legalization framework in a much more organic way, like we were describing before, like, just kind of mimic the illegal market. Only that, like if you have a place where you want to grow, they didn't restrict it by zones or anything like that. You just paid like $2,500 for a license, which is super cheap. Like in Denver, if you wanted to get a license, I think it's, $1 million and up. And you are limited to only specific facilities that have been approved by the government that you can grow there. So imagine in a state like Oklahoma, where you can just grow anywhere that you have a facility that could support the electricity and the air conditioning and whatever else you need, and you're going to grow. And for $2,500, they'll grant you a license, and there's basically no limit to it. Everybody and their brothers buying a license. That state took off, and we are in Oklahoma in a big way. I have an LLC that's being run by my associate, Rocky Fisher, and he's in Bixby, Oklahoma. People should look him up. He's doing seed production as well as flower production for Brothers Grimm there. We've taken on a distributor. This company is called Stash House, and they supply the dispensaries all throughout Oklahoma with many products, but they've also taken on our seed line. So if you want to be a retailer of Brothers Grimm Seeds in your dispensary and you're in Oklahoma, reach out to the Stash House people, and they will hook you up with our seeds on a wholesale retail basis. So that's taking off, and next year I hope that it's just 10 times what we did this year. It's really possible it could be because of the explosion of people in the commercial trade seeing the value of starting an entire crop from fem seed rather than having to get clones or grow regular seeds and pick out the males and that sort of thing. I had a guy call me, and it was one of the bean pickers, bean counters, I should say, in one of the companies, an accountant, in other words, right? And he said, I did the math, and it looks like it's so much more cost effective to just start with all female seeds than like to order clones and these kinds of things. I was like, yeah, when it's definitely for many reasons, you're starting with plants that are all going to germinate and grow to similar heights and be kept in uniform ranks, if you will, right? You're a military person. So imagine all these soldiers growing up and being, exactly the same sizes and at the same stage of development, whereas it's kind of hard to get 10,000 clones or 100,000 clones all at the same exact state, So, and not only that, a clone would be 10 times the price of a seed almost, right? So guy told me, I did the math, and I like the idea of growing from fem seeds. And I said, well, let's
you're the man. You're the man to do it.
And so very, very happy about it. The business side of it is one thing, but also it's hugely important to me to have that connection with the community that I enjoy. And I'm very serious about trying to, reach out and be more informative than I already am. And we're not going to the seminars, doing the seminars and the big meetings lately. So maybe I'll find the time to create those little videos and do that more often. I try to promise to do that to everybody out there.
I would watch those in a heartbeat. And one of the questions I definitely wanted to touch on, because I know you're a busy man with places to go and people to meet. How did you come up with Brothers Grimm? What inspired the name for the company?
We started out 1996. We weren't really a company or whatever you want to even call it. Remember the rudimentary internet that I described, like message rooms and so on? There was a special chat room that was set up by elite growers at that time. we called it the 77 for whatever reason. I sometimes think it was because like 77 degrees Fahrenheit is almost perfect for a grow room. So I guess we were the 77, we're just the right temperature, not anyhow, I don't know. But in that chat room, there was another fella named Sly. I'm Mr. Soul, and there were guys, Eric 77, and a bunch of all different names, Scoosh, and so on. Sly reaches out to me one day because of the development of some of the strains that I was working on as I was creating Cinderella 99, and I created Apollo 11 and 13 and so on. He started to realize like, hey, we could make a business of this. And I'm also creating seeds over here. And he lived in Las Vegas and I lived in Boston. And this is a funny arrangement because people might be interested to, and fascinated by the idea as I am when I look back on it. Here we are, two guys, right? i.e. bros, right? Two bros. So Brothers Grimm, and we had this grim determination to succeed and create this company together. And the fact that I named my strain Cinderella, and Brothers Grimm was the writing team behind Cinderella originally, right? The fairy tale writers, right?
Yeah.
So Cinderella also, folds back into the name of the company as well. So we're Brothers Grimm. I think that happily, and very fortunately, we chose that name, and it has the right connotation. It just like feels like a cannabis company, Brothers Grimm. Like these guys put out serious cannabis, right? We are the breeders. And Sly has passed away. He's deceased now. I talked to some folks who knew him very well, and he had been in bad shape physically and died. Back around the turn of the century, if we can use that term, right? Maybe 2005, so a little later. So we love the name now, I think, myself, my new partners, the people who are out there who I talk to about marketing and so on, we love that name, Brothers Grimm, because it has that connotation that makes you feel like this is a serious cannabis company. Yeah. And legalization has only really existed, if we go back, what was the first state that legalized? It was Colorado in 2012, maybe, right? So what's that, 8 years? Mm-hmm. So think about it. If you're in the cannabis business, or you want to be in the cannabis business, how do you separate yourself from everybody else? You're just going to be, Joe's cannabis company or Bill's cannabis company, right? You have at most 8 years experience, right? But a company like Brothers Grimm, we can say, hey, we've been in the trenches in this business since 97. Over 20 years of impeccable reputation for the quality of the products and the customer service, as well as having, this character as the leader of the company who is actually accessible to the public and is part of the community. And, all that ties together in a great way, because if I'm somebody new coming into this business, what I'd want to do is get on the coattails of somebody like Brothers Grimm and say like, well, we're with this established company that has this reputation of excellence for such a long time and has a recognizable brand. And so I think that really goes a long way, and it's probably been instrumental in this last year or two. It's like, I always tell people it took me 20 years to be an overnight success, because it only starts to pick up at the very end. It's like an exponential curve, and it's so flat for so long, but it's starting to get better, and the time has come. Logic prevails. Remember at the beginning, I was saying, you can't keep it illegal, because eventually logic will prevail and people will see it for what it is and realize that you can't have legal alcohol and tobacco and say somehow marijuana is this demon that's too hard to control, like we can't possibly allow that into the public.
She's not tall enough for the ride.
Exactly. You like that? I'm a big analogy guy. Do you notice that? Everything's an analogy.
I love your analogies. I love them. Oh, we have a viewer question. I'm really excited. And the viewer question is from Scotty Hall. Ooh, what is the best way to contact Rick directly? How do we get a hold of you, Rick? Where do we find you?
Imagine the creativity that had to be gotten into, and how hard I had to work at this, but I came up with this as an email address, Mr. Soul at brothersgrimmseeds.com.
Perfect.
Could that be any easier? I mean, it doesn't take you could almost guess that would be my email, Mr. Soul at brothersgrimmseeds.com, right? Simple as that. And it's soul, S-O-U-L.
Exactly. And is that
like I need to say that?
Yeah. For Mr. Soul, have you always been Mr. Soul since like the 90s? Was that because it was your online handle?
Yeah, in those anonymous chat rooms, you didn't want to reveal who you really were, so you couldn't say your real name. Like, it's funny even to see me, on a screen here, and it says Rick Campanella in the corner instead of Mr. Soul. But you wanted to hide your identity because you were doing something very illegal that you could do 20 years in prison for. So I had to come up with some screen name handle, and here's how I came up with it. I was thinking of the song Mr. Fantasy, but somehow I goofed it in my mind, and I thought the name of the song was Mr. Soul. And I also thought, well, Mr. Soul will be a really good name because these words that are appearing on the screen as I type, their source is basically my soul. So I'm pouring my soul out through the keyboard and onto the screen. And so it seemed like the right name. And so it stuck. Oh, I'm not wearing my ring today, but shout out to Trey Dadius. Trey Dadius, my ring is upstairs in the shower, dude. I left it off today, but I wear it 99.9% of the time. I have a fan in Boston. His name's Trey Dadius. And he made me a silver ring, and it has the word soul right across it. And
I've seen it.
I'm so proud. You've seen that, right? I wish I had it on right now because he doesn't get enough credit for being such a cool guy. And he's a great supporter online, like Facebook and Instagram and so on. I have a lot of people like that out there that I wish I could name them all, but suffice it to say that I really, I'm so appreciative and grateful every day that I get up and I get to live the life that I feel I was meant to live. And it came finally, the 20 years to be an overnight success, but I'm finally doing what I feel like I was put here to do. And it's super gratifying. If you do what you love, you'll never work another day in your life, right? So.
And you're the perfect example of that.
Let's leave it at that. And either time in the future, Ellen, it's always a pleasure. You're my favorite person out there on the speaking circuit and the best hugger.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait to hug you. And thank you so much. And I hope, the gravity of our conversation sticks with you. Just that, when you were breeding these strains, I was 6 years old. And now I'm talking to you and thanking you. So the work you've done has created a legacy that, you have planted seeds that you will never know the shade of. And thank you for that.
I read somewhere that the people who are creating history never realize that they're actually creating history. And I can definitely say that's true, because I had no idea that it would ever become what it's become today at the time when I was doing it. It's like when you're a good Hindu, and you follow the Bhagavad Gita, you just do the work in front of you well and don't worry about the fruits of your labor. They'll just take care of themselves if you do the right work every day and step by step. So I guess that's the way I've lived, and it fell in place, thankfully. Thank you so much again for having me on. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and MassCann's Normal, the sponsor of this show, I actually was working as an engineer at Combustion Engineering in Windsor, Connecticut. In 1987, I started there, and these people somehow got me on the Normal mailing list. And so I've actually, from their inception in 1989, I was a member. So, I'm so pleased to be on this show and be able to say that, that this company, this organization, when they first formed, I was one of their first members probably signing on. I know that they used to email me regularly at work and I'd get paranoid about it. Like, I wonder if anybody sees the emails coming in from Normal,
Oh my gosh. Well, this is so wonderful. And if you haven't already, please sign up for MassCann and become a member. And you can find out more information on their Facebook, on their website. They are on every social media platform. You can find
Google MassCann Normal.
MassCann Normal, absolutely. I'm Ellen Brown, and thank you for a wonderful morning. This has been the best way to start the day. Thank you, Mr. Soul.
Thank you,
MassCann's.
Ellen. Take care now.
Bye.
All the
Bye.
best.
Thank you as well.